thank you so much for joining me today. Can we start off with a little bit of who you are and what you do?
My name's Andy Crowley, but I go by Andy Guitar on online and YouTube. I'm a YouTube guitar teacher, but I also have a website that teaches guitar, and I've been doing this for 12 years now online.
Wow.
But for the first 5 years, I was a face-to-face teacher, teaching evening classes in a school, teaching from home, and got fully booked with that. Done various other things like being in a cover band back in the day, being a lighting engineer at O2 Academy type venues. But for the past 6 years or so, I've pretty much been, yeah, I've been YouTube full time and website full time. I divide my time between both, and I see them kind of they're both part of the same thing.
I think that's a fantastically humble introduction to what you do, really, Andy. I think
So I got
it's,
called
it,
out. I got called out by a friend of mine for this friend of mine being Sean Daniel also from YouTube, and he said he claimed when he was talking to me about like humble brags. I was like, oh no, I don't even do it, and he's like, no, you don't. And then throughout the conversation, I then did it another 3 times, like one way or another. So the other claim to fame is that I do have the most watched guitar lesson video on YouTube, and I do have one of those big gold 1 million subscriber plaques, which is up there on the wall.
you need to put it behind you, Andy. I mean, it's
I
totally.
do,
Is this
but
a reflection of your personality, perhaps, that you're sort of.
maybe. Do you know another reflection of the personality? It's above where I work, so it's like a reminder. Like that's what you're supposed to be. So you've got to be that, by the way.
So I mean, I like the explanation of the most watched guitar lesson video on YouTube, which is encompasses how successful you are in this sense. But I don't know, you're kind of like a household name in the way of learning uh, quick access to a song. Well, I mean, there's many more levels to it, but I know particularly from my point of view, if I need to learn a song, I will go to you, and you will be
Oh.
teaching it, and that's just so wide. I think even not just for guitar teachers and people delivering that stuff. What what's the story, man? How did it come about?
Really,
Um,
really naturally, but I can explain that very simply by saying I was a face-to-face guitar teacher just working from home, and in many ways that was like my dream job.
mm,
Being able to teach guitar for a living was something that I was aware of, even being a 15, 16-year old, seeing the ads in the paper and stuff. Um, and YouTube, and I'd say online video, but YouTube was online video back in 2009 when I started teaching, because there was nowhere else that you could really upload videos, and it was almost like a video library. It was just free online hosting. The videos I
mm.
uploaded to YouTube in 2009 and 2010 were not meant to be seen by the world on YouTube and trying to be a YouTuber. It was simply to put videos up there so I could put the URL on my website and show it there,
Wow.
literally for one-to-one lessons. So going back to the most watched guitar lesson on YouTube, which at some point that's not going to be the case, but I believe at this date, at the start of 2021, it is. That video was filmed on a £20 webcam that I still have. I'm using a better one now. So this is literally like better, in some ways, better quality than literally the video. And I even say in that video, this is what to expect before your first lesson with me. Because it was on my website as like, this is a test. Because all I was seeing when I was advertising in Leeds, which is where I started teaching, was like absolute beginner to absolute beginner, another absolute beginner, from people from all walks of life, all ages, from 6 to 96. but they were total beginners that were coming to me naturally. So I made those videos for YouTube, just teaching an easy song or the same stuff that I would do in lessons. And that one video, it had a catchy title. I knew it was a catchy title, play 10 songs with 2 chords. But yeah, that video just blew up, and that's the only reason. You describe me as a household name, which I am if you've Googled guitar lessons. but I'm not a household name unless you've Googled guitar lessons. But yeah, that's the only reason that anything sort of took off for me. I've built other layers to that. I've built upon that and built a more robust thing, with like the website, teaching guitar and being quite self-sufficient aside from YouTube. But yeah, the YouTube traffic funnels everything. And yeah, I've been very lucky in that regard, because there's only so much planning or there's only so good you can be before it becomes just up to the internet or down to algorithms and just down to pure luck, basically.
The gods of the algorithms, who are the algorithms themselves, perhaps.
I guess so.
But I actually think it is fair to say a household name, because like, I know you're saying if you've Googled guitar lessons, but I mean that's a pretty household wide thing to have done, isn't it? I mean, and that's amazing to hear that's come from that sort of real, essentially a real face-to-face interaction, because you're linking, that video was linked to the actual real-time lessons that you were giving. And then it's sort of grown into this amazing library of lessons. What's changed from how you were delivering lessons at that point to how you're delivering them now? Because I personally, what I recognise is the wonderful simplicity in which you explain them. Is that a key all the way through this journey, or has that sort of evolved?
I think from teaching anyone face to face, you learn that people learn different things at different speeds, but also they can get one concept but not another. And when you give them both, even though they might get one, the whole thing falls apart and they just can't accept what you're telling them, and they can't internalize it. So that certainly makes me have a good instinct for keeping the more complex things simple. And there's also that other thing, which is, and I don't know who it's a quote from, but if you can't explain a complex thing simply, then you don't understand it. And I'd really like that. I think there's a lot of, and how things change with delivery. I think keeping things simple in a world where a lot of the biggest YouTubers in my space are actually way more knowledgeable than me, way more qualified than me. The one thing that I stand apart with is keeping things simple for the everyday person, because those are the people that I was seeing that were naturally coming to me just from a few videos and basic advertising for face-to-face lessons.
That's wonderful. People learn things at different speeds. So is your solution to catering for that fact, that very, very basic education fact, which we kind of probably all are guilty of forgetting, whether it is that you're sat one-to-one with a student or whether you're sat in a classroom of 30 kids, that everyone is learning things at different speeds, but also different parts of what you're providing. So your solution to that is simplicity of sort of demonstration, or?
Yes, but there must be some kind of knack for keeping simple things entertaining, which it has to be said, like pretty much all the biggest YouTubers all have a kind of silly accent or some kind of silly voice, which for the rest of the world or anyone outside of Yorkshire, I have a bit of a silly accent, which I have toned down so much just to be understood. Because there's no point in speaking unless you're to be understood. But even when I went to university, which was about 20 miles from where I was born, I went to university in Huddersfield. But so there were so many people from London and international students at university, and for the first week they could not understand me because
Wowzers.
I said something like, "Hey up, my name's Andy. What's your name?" And they went, "What?"
What?
So I was like, "Oh, okay." And then there were other people that they had a name that was just a little bit weird to pronounce, that perhaps wasn't something as simple as Andy, and that was just a running joke for the entire first year.
Mm-hmm.
So that was another lesson where my second name's Crowley, but anyone from London in particular will naturally read that and think it is Crowley.
Cool. Right.
Which is not wrong, because there's Ozzy Osbourne, Mr. Crowley. And then anyone else reading it might say Crawley, but Crawley is how it's spelled with an A. And then you go like, okay, this is a simple last name, but even that's complicated. So how can we simplify that? And the solution was to just say Andy Guitar, which there are a few other someone guitars in this world. There was even an Andy Guitar in London who had andyguitar.co.uk or something to that effect. And I was like, okay, if he's doing it in his local area, I'll do that for my local area. And then it was only afterwards that it became a good thing for worldwide stuff. But yeah, even then, yeah, speaking to be understood was a huge lesson that I learned early on.
So, sorry, Andy, are you sort of almost suggesting that, because you said you sort of tone down your accent, but then is it that it's a unique identifying thing as well, but it's kind of a...
Yeah, well, there's that sweet spot, isn't there? It's like, I don't know, it's like Billy Connolly. Billy Connolly's really, really Scottish comedian, but he got so much more famous, to my understanding, when he started doing things in America. But if you listen back to any videos of him in the 70s, Americans would not have understood him, because it's his dialect. It's the words that he uses and the turns of phrase just wouldn't be understood outside of Glasgow. But Billy Connolly still sounds Scottish, but to anyone from where he's from, they go, he doesn't sound like us, or he doesn't sound like he used to. And I really, really identify with that, to the point where I even take the mickey out of rock stars and pop stars, like a couple of guys from One Direction and Alex Turner from the Arctic Monkeys, because they have that weird kind of mid-Atlantic, it's kind of odd, the odd Yorkshireisms and then the odd words from elsewhere. But I hold my hands up. That's exactly me, because that's what's happened. And it's just from being understood and from moving outside of your local area, because the north of England in particular, more than most places, is so has such colloquial language and dialects that are different 5 miles down the road. There are entire words and things that don't exist 5 miles down the road. So yeah, when you're talking like worldwide stuff, it really matters.
Oh yeah, I mean, I feel like we're talking about something fantastically sensitive as well, because the sort of advice that you've got to, especially as I'm speaking with a sort of a particularly generic Southern English accent. My friend, who was from somewhere else, used to tell me to tone down my Englishness, in fact.
But that Englishness could be really endearing to someone that, isn't as familiar with it, or...
Even the fact that he referred to it as Englishness, whereas your accent is just as Englishness as my accent is Englishness. So it's kind of, I feel we're almost going to start to have some kind of political conversation about this stuff.
Oh no, we don't. I'm purely doing music as escapism. We don't need any of that.
But you know what I mean? It's that's huge stuff that you're sort of having to adjust how you talk. But then on a less sort of philosophical way, actually, just in education, changing how you talk is a day-to-day part of communicating. And you're talking about communicating with a global audience. So actually taking that into consideration is obviously a huge thing.
I have people who've messaged me saying that I help them learn English. And I'm like, dear God, don't do that.
Yes, it's amazing. I think that's great. I mean, one of the reasons I tune into your channel is because of your accent, mate. I think you should tone it up. Um,
It does
so,
come out sometimes. It's when you're not thinking about it. My girlfriend laughs whenever I'm on the phone to my mum for like the hour afterward. And my mum is she's so correct. What's it called? Correct pronunciation, like Queen's English. She totally does a telephone voice, correct pronunciation or something. Yeah, my mum, from where we're from, is so well spoken, but I talk on the phone for her for 5 minutes, and I'm like, I go back to how it was 15 years ago more. But yeah, it is what it is.
It's great. It's great, man. I think it's interesting that we're even terming it as well spoken. But hey, anyway, so that's fantastic in a sort of a global communication way, which is obviously something that specifically faces is a challenge or a key to sort of your success in that way. What about when it's just specific to video communication, which is something that obviously, like we were saying in our little chat before, that all teachers, all educators are now realizing, I'm going to have to explain this over Zoom or another popular platform that is available, or I'm going to have to pre-record a video lesson. And I know, let's be honest, that some people are absolutely awful at that because it's not something that's super easy. What's the tips to success there, Andy?
When you're talking to a camera, you're speaking to one person is the biggest tip. And I taught so many people back in the day, like 10 years ago, 8 years ago, that I even imagine one of those people that I taught a lot, that I'm teaching it to them. And that's the biggest thing, because it's almost like the show Black Mirror. When I explained to my girlfriend, she didn't know where that came from, and it was like, the Black Mirror is a screen that's turned off, and she was like, "Whoa, that's it." But you kind of have a very small Black Mirror as a thing that you're talking to, so it's not a friendly look when you're talking to camera. But if you just imagine that it's a person, and it's a person that you are trying to keep engaged with what you're doing, because we all like look at our phone and then look elsewhere, and then look at the TV and look elsewhere. You're trying to keep them here so that you can show them the thing that will help them. Yeah, there are little tricks to doing that, but you learn those as you go. The first and foremost thing is you're talking to one person. So if you got 1 million people watch the video, 1 million people connect with it, because you're speaking to that one person every time that they watch it.
Wow, which makes the sort of medium of video learning quite unique in that sense, doesn't it? Because it's more personal than, say, a group lesson in some senses.
Group lessons can be very hard, not least over Zoom, but of course in actual group lessons, which I did, I still do to this day. We still do like guitar breaks, and we do guitar retreats, or the odd one-off group lesson to 15 people, 20 people, or 6 people sometimes, multiple people in a room. The way that you can do that with people physically there is perhaps teach the same song or same concept, but at multi-level. So you have a basic way to do it, and you try and group those together here, intermediates here, the advanced people there. And you can even, for guitar lessons, you can have the people that are more beginners just playing the chords or doing the riff. The advanced players improvising a solo over that riff, but trying to make sure the beginners don't hear it too loud to put them off. And the intermediate players can have the capo in a different position, for example. You're all jamming the same song, but you're giving 3 different lessons, and the song's just a vehicle. With Zoom lessons, really hard to do that. And in fact, I have loads of experience with this, because I did live streaming for about 1.5 years, once a week, about 1 year on Facebook, and then about 6 months on YouTube.
Pre-COVID craziness.
Yeah, this was like 2017. But one of the reasons I haven't done any live streaming during COVID times has been it was just inefficient to do what I wanted it to do. Which, if unless you're taking live questions or doing something that has to be seen live, there's no point in doing a live stream. Make a video on it. Make a video instead that's planned and that you put across what you want to put across. If you're taking questions, it's very difficult to take questions with the amount of comments that were coming up for me, because it was just a mass of questions and you're just scrolling through comments all the time, and it stops being an engaging video. One way we could have done it is by having someone else with me doing the questions and then feeding the questions to me. That would have been a good way to do it. But then I'm having to pay someone else for their time, or we're having to do something like it. It just becomes more than it is worth. And it just wasn't the route that I wanted to go down. I wanted to make my the content that becomes the back catalogue as solid as possible. The live streams were not rewatchable, basically. And I was like, I don't want to do that. Everything that's worked for me to grow online kind of compounds. And a lot of videos that keep getting views kind of get more views over time, not less. It kind of goes out exponentially. That's where the 1 million subscribers thing come from. And I was like, if I'm going to do more of that, I need to make sure to everything that I'm in control of, that keeps happening, rather than just the one shot and it's gone.
And it's fascinating, isn't it? Because when COVID hit, I remember my Facebook stream was just for I don't know, a good 2 months. It was 90% live videos from friend musicians, and you're sort of thinking, well, what's the? I mean, obviously, it's a. This is no criticism of those people doing that. I certainly did one as well, but it's kind of that. Well, what we're all almost working out what was the value of that, because it's like, well, we missed live performance, but actually, if you're not in a venue and picking up a vibe, this is a totally different beast. Is there any reason for you to actually do that? What's the sort of?
No, of course, and it was all forced upon people, wasn't it? People working out how to make the most of the time. And, you know, huge captive audience with everyone at home, but also that became telly for a while. You know, Graham Norton was Zoom calls. And what I saw happening, or what connected with me, was, well, not what would connect with most people. Everything just became niche. The live streamers I like to follow were not the ones getting loads of views. We're not the popular ones. It was literally just something that was really specific to me. There was one live stream with the drummer from the Arctic Monkeys, who's Matt Helders. He never does interview. I haven't seen an interview with him for 15 years. He wasn't talking about anything in particular. He was talking about drumming and stuff. I think it was a drummer who was doing the interview. But I was like, this is amazing, because I know we won't see this often. Another one's Daniel Sloth, who was literally just day drinking on camera. He's a stand-up comedian. I love him as a stand-up. He's literally day drinking, but it was his way of doing stand-up to a live audience and keeping sharp, but making it a thing as well. And the joke was he's Scottish, so he day drinks. He's now live streaming on Twitch. Now, I don't get Twitch, but Twitch is largely gaming. But live streaming of YouTubers has certainly more moved to Twitch rather than staying on YouTube, because it doesn't necessarily, or I've heard it actually damages your YouTube channel if you get a lot of views and then you live stream and the live streams don't get the engagement. It damages the channel. Which was another reason to say why I wouldn't do it.
Really, really interesting. Really kind of refreshing to hear someone who's so have their career based within tech to talk about other platforms and almost be like, yeah, I don't actually get that world, you know.
Oh, tell me, mate, honestly, I've never had any traction at all on Facebook or Instagram, for example. You know, I get some people crossing over, but it's almost impossible to port an audience. So if you've got a big YouTube following, or if you're big on TikTok, it's really hard to get those people to cross over to another platform, to the point where it's almost not really worth it. You just have to do more of what works on that platform, build them all individually. So if anyone that's like wanting to build a social following themselves or do something that I do, you have to pick one platform to maximum, because the same stuff ain't going to work on another platform. And yeah, for me, that has totally been all in on YouTube, but also Google, because Google and YouTube are really related there. the same company, really. And YouTube is all about coming up on search terms, and or at least it was a while ago. It's more about ranking well for search terms and getting views when people search for something. People search a how-to, for example. How to play guitar, I want to come up. Google's exactly the same, and that was the same as when I was trying to rank for guitar lessons leads 10 years ago. On Facebook, you don't search for a video, they pop up. And I've never got that. I've never been good at that style of content. Same with Instagram. It's just a video that pops up. You know, you can even like find a video pop up and then you can't find it the day after if you want to rewatch it, which is why they got the new saved feature and stuff. So yeah, those sort of platforms I've never done well with, and also I just don't like them because it's out of your control, I guess. I don't work well with those type of platforms. YouTube's been more my bag.
That's really interesting. Really, really interesting. I suppose Instagram and Facebook are more sort of, it's passive consumption, isn't it? It's like you're sat watching the TV and what's on next is what you're going to watch, rather than go, okay, I'm going to find out this unique piece of information. Let's we've covered some epic ground already. I feel this is gold dust if we stopped it right now. Anyway, I'm particularly pleased, Andy, how it's going. But can we go back again and sort of reflect on almost how we got here and how things have changed? Because so you're talking about YouTube in this way of, you know, search terms and, okay, I want to learn how to play this particular track, or I want to learn how to play bar chords, and that is an incredible thing to be able to do. If we sort of forget that we have the internet for a moment, that's, you know, when I was a teenager, that wasn't a thing that really existed. It was a thing of, okay, maybe I think tabs were starting to appear. I remember looking up the odd riff on, I don't know if it was Ultimate Guitar. I seem to remember like 911 tabs or something like that.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
Some real, I know they were all in this sort of text format, and but they were pretty bad quite often, and definitely in comparison to now, as you say, where if I want to learn the best way to play this song, and I've got a million different options, what's your sort of reflection on that sort of difference? And I mean, how old are you, buddy? What was your sort of growing up experience in that sense?
34. So I learned guitar pre-internet.
Right.
Did I get better at guitar post-internet? Hell yeah. But I'll be honest, I don't know how I did so well at learning guitar. And in many ways I didn't, because I never had traditional lessons. I had like a handful of lessons with group lessons when I was like 9 and hated it. And then I asked for a guitar for my 13th birthday and had an acoustic, strummed some chords for a year, got an electric after that. But I was having piano lessons from being about 9. So the way I see it is I learned music and then I learned how to play music on a guitar afterwards. But I got, and wow, technology and general MIDI and the piano roll and drawing the notes in, that was something I used to do for fun. I love that kind of, I used to copy, you know, pop songs that I heard on the radio and try and find them out and try and make it all sound like it.
That's really interesting. What, using the piano roll rather than the notation, actually?
I was doing that from being 9, but I had an older brother who's well into his computer music. So I'd seen him doing that. He'd made little backing tracks for me. And then I got his old computer at some point and he taught me a couple of things and let me play. Man, it rains a lot in Yorkshire. So I was on that a lot. I couldn't always play outside, you know. So that was what I did rather than, you know, or the same thing as computer games for me. I just saw it as the same thing. But yeah, therefore reading tab was a real block for me, and learning by ear was quicker because I just didn't get the tab thing. And then it really wasn't until I left uni started considering to become a teacher and wanted to sharpen my skills, learn a whole new bunch of songs, learning songs to be in a cover band and playing a wedding band and stuff. I needed to learn a lot more stuff. I got loads better at reading tab very quickly through having to do it. And but it was a struggle. And the kind of interactive tab that's available now and more gamification of learning would have been amazing for me back in the day, and it would have changed how I learned. But I also might not have as good ear training as I do now, which is the other thought. With the more gamification and a bit more spoon-fed learning, do the ears and the natural instinct for rhythm and things, do they develop as much as they need to? Because all the best guitar players learned by having vinyl recordings and just listening to them and copying what they heard that way, and then checking the fingers afterwards. Check the fingers when they saw them live or something like that. So yeah, there's no right or wrong way, and that just shows more how different things kind of connect.
Yeah, that's really interesting. In the sense of maybe this is why we can always, because I was going to ask you if you thought that YouTube, if you like, lessons were going to gradually phase out one-to-one sessions.
If anything, I see it the other way. I think YouTube will make more people play guitar. I think we've seen that during the pandemic, but I also think anybody that I get so many requests all the time for one-to-one lessons. And if I did them, after time, I'd just be showing them like what I'm showing them in a video. But again, people don't learn the same. And everybody wants what's going to help me. What's going to help me obviously isn't what's going to help everyone. So how can you help me right now? And often that is the same thing that everybody needs, but just told in a way that makes it relevant to that person.
So there's still value in basically creating a sort of a curriculum for an individual. Because you can't tell people what to Google search, basically.
You can, but they don't know instinctively what to search for. So you're always, when I do one-to-one, I'm always creating a personalized curriculum from a whole backlog of stuff. And I've heard that's a very good way to do it, but obviously you can't do that at scale. It only ever works one-to-one sort of thing. But yeah, there will always be, and there's more one-to-one teachers now than there ever was in the 90s pre-internet.
Right. Okay. So you think the two are going hand in hand? Then they're sort of growing, because there is a, and I want to be able to. Well, maybe I could edit this in afterwards, couldn't I? There's a philosopher who sort of talks about tech always being a sort of an extension of the human sort of needs and ideas, and that's sometimes we can view the internet or video lessons or whatever as this is trying to be a replacement, but it's not, is it? It's an augmentation. Is that a good way of sort of describing it?
It is, yeah, and people learn from people is a huge thing. So someone can be saying all the exact right stuff to them, but you don't listen to them. Like, I don't know, your parents. If your parents tell you something, you don't listen because, that's my mum and dad. They're always talking nonsense. But, if your friend at school tells you something, you take it as solid gold, even though he's like, not qualified at all. But it's just someone who you have that rapport with. Often it's someone removed from your personal situation. Like, my dad, I did a few driving lessons with my dad and my driving got worse. I had driving lessons with an instructor and my driving was fine. And it's just because it's the natural situation. My girlfriend who I live with watched some of my videos for ukulele lessons on YouTube. And then I showed her a couple of things to take her more than that. And she was like, yeah, I actually prefer this guy on the video. You talk too much. I can mute him.
So again, kind of comes down to personality then, and even maybe how you're shaping your voice and how all these sort of like tiny nuances, you think, or
it's a lot of tiny nuances. And it's talking about that. It's a huge learning curve when you first start seeing yourself on camera, and then seeing yourself on camera as much as I do. Talk about being self-aware. It's exactly the same thing as hearing your own voice on an answering machine or something, just to put it into context for anyone else listening that hasn't recorded themselves or anything. But yeah, when it's so, I mean, I had the same thing when I started to learn to sing, and I was like, okay, this I can sing in tune, but there's a lot of things I don't like about my voice. How can I change that for that? And you want to sing better, but you have to like change how your mouth is, how you breathe, everything to improve your singing. And I've also taken all that sort of knowledge and moved it over to video and how I speak and things like that.
Right. So you would suggest to people who are now moving to the medium of video for lessons to review how they're doing it and tweak and change. And
If you don't do that, you're learning in the dark. If that's something that you're trying to improve on. If someone was learning guitar, whether online or in person, at some point you have to record yourself, because you need to. It's everything sounds different. Sounds sound different when you're listening back to them as to when you're producing them. It's the only way to improve that thing. And it's the same for video, because what ends up in the video is all people see. You can have loads of ideas that you thought you said in the video or how you thought you delivered it, but until you review it back, you've no idea.
it's really interesting as far as like classroom teachers go, because I think, you know, reflective practice, it's a sort of an obsessional teacher thing for good reason, because we obviously want teachers to be better and not be rubbish. But having said that, the idea of recording their acting, you know, is a relatively new thing. I think there was the name of the program escapes me, but there was a thing in a school that I was involved in where it was teachers recording their lessons and then reflecting back and sort of peer reviewing it almost. But that's not really a standard thing. Whereas,
well, it is a standard thing, but it's done by either Ofsted or done by someone in that school. Because every teacher that starts at I've done some teaching at a music university in Brighton called Waterbear. It's kind of a startup, but it was amazing to have the opportunity to do university level teaching. And yeah, I was observed and assessed for that lesson. And yeah, I think everybody is at some point, but if you're not used to it,
it's quite different though, isn't it, from someone else feeding back to you, being sitting there and going, oh whoa, I actually sound like that, or I look like that. Or
I think it might be a shock to a lot of people, and if they've not done it yet, find a way to do it, even if it's not in the classroom situation, because it's enlightening for sure.
It's going to make you better ultimately, isn't it? I suppose.
Yeah, but it's a steep learning curve, though. It's as I say,
and
surely, it can be a shock.
Ego must sort of, you've got to be prepared, right? You've got to be sort of fairly resilient, not to just go, oh, I'm awful, and just give up in that sense.
It is, but I do the same with students, where it's like, there's only, if you're recording yourself playing an instrument, for example, and you record it on your own, there's only you going to hear it. So it's nothing, the only thing you're being scared about is letting yourself hear it. But in many ways, if anybody else heard that, they've heard you speak before, they've seen you before, they know you better than you sometimes. So yeah, it's just an opportunity to get that third eye to improve those things, and I'm very receptive to that. I know a lot of people aren't, and it's a virtue if they're not sometimes, because that's why we like the people we like, that's why we like the artists we like, the musicians that we like. They are authentic, they are themselves. But yeah, if you want to be a teacher, I think part of it is having that nous to adjust how you are, and then try and inspire someone in their own, in something that's going to connect with them.
Wonderful, thank you. So Andy, to guide us towards the end of conversation, what can I ask you, what your sort of vision of future, well, I say vision, not that you've got a plan globally for the rest of the world, and you're moving into politics or something, but what I'd vote for you, but what do you think is going to happen? Because you must sort of you must be looking forward to the future with your business, as from a YouTube perspective, from an app perspective. What do you see as happening within the next few years with learning and tech in this way?
Pre-pandemic, I thought I'm going to end up refilming all my lessons within the next 5 years in 3D or something, or in
Really?
hologram form. You know what I mean? I did. I don't know whether
Seriously, you really sort of thought, okay, the
I could
format's
see it
gonna.
happening. I could see a change probably happening. But if anything, what the pandemic's taught me in terms of tech is it needs to be user friendly to take off at all, and the ideas of tech are always way behind what people use. So but I do think a lot of the norms that things that have become normal during this last year are here to stay for a lot longer than the end of it being a pandemic or anything. Things like Zoom calls through work and people working from home, if not all the time, a lot of the time, because it's been proven to work. Basically, you can work from home, you can do Zoom meetings, and it doesn't all fall apart. And people do work when they're not in the office. And I think before this last year, I think that was actually a bigger question than it is now. And it's cheaper as well because I work from home because then I don't have to pay for another building. I don't have to pay for a receptionist or a lease, and I don't have to travel to work, so it saves a bit of time. That's the same for any business now. And when the bottom lines are getting close, the first thing to try is to keep working from your staff working from home, basically, or remote workers from anywhere in the world. I employ video editors and web developers. None of them live in Brighton. And it's just irrelevant for certain jobs. There's always those jobs where, someone needs to be there. But I think for those where it's a bit on the fence, it will become a 50-50 type thing. 50% in the office and then 50% working from home or working remotely.